kind of the big first, if you will, was in 1968. Jaja Reichardt at the Institute of Contemporary Art in London curated a show called Cybernetic Serendipity that went on to the Exploratorium in San Francisco and to Washington, D.C. In May of 72, Dimitri and the Kitchen team put together a wonderful program for the month of May. And on Sundays, Dimitri held a seminar called Perception and Cybernetics, which I think really led to the first Computer Art Festival the following year. So the first festival was held at the Kitchen, April of 1973. It was, very successful in terms of the number of artists that participated, the number of presentations that were given, live interactive pieces, and then quite a number of films from traditional filmmakers as well as filmmakers who were really embracing new technology like video art and synthesis and computers. 73 was really the first year I began doing video art pieces. This piece was called The Heartbeat Tape. WNET TV Lab was the first purchaser of the Red Etra video synthesizer. So a lot of the experimentation was done at the TV lab. And this still frame is from Video Wallpaper, also from 1973. And it was really the moment I got really hooked on doing video art and what I could see in terms of the potential. It was really the quality of the light and the ability to create kinetic paintings with light that got me turned on and hooked in terms of working with video as opposed to painting. Narcissicon was also created in 1973. We were playing basically with duplicating images using the synthesizer. And Bill created sort of this mirror concept with the Red Etra. And then I started to interact with my face with the circular images and then created, sort of this narrative, if you will, or dramatic kind of tension that took place. The second festival was in the new home of the Kitchen on Wooster Street, and that was in June 74. But in addition to the people who were in the first festival, the people on this list are new people who came to the show. It was a really nice gathering of the tribe. The third festival was the one I was most involved with because I was a participant, but I was also one of the coordinators for the festival. It was a very weird time in New York. It was sort of on the verge of bankruptcy. I was there the night at the City University Computer Center working on a piece, and Ira Fuchs pulled out the paper tape, and basically New York was bankrupt. And shortly thereafter, my job was cut, which didn't surprise me. And so I was able to really focus on, making art and curating. So that was kind of a turning point for me. There was a digital control of analog devices where many, many, many people jammed into my loft and got demonstrations from Tom Defani and Dr. Lou Katz and Bill. What's interesting, I think, mostly is that since it was in an academic facility, the Graduate Center, it had a much broader audience and a much broader lay audience than the previous festivals in the Kitchen. 10 years later, after that I chaired the SIGGRAPH Art Show in San Francisco. Anybody who understands computer graphics and computer art knows that it tends to be a fairly narrow focus of people who do it and people who enjoy seeing it. So it was always nice to get it out into the public.
The main criterion that we seemed to find all the time was we wanted to distinguish between what was art that had some sort of a statement or content, or that was a piece, as opposed to just wallpaper, just something that you would sit back and groove on and watch the images change. It's very easy to be impressive, to show fancy equipment, wham, bam, look how great this looks. And we lose track very quickly of what the content is. I had a story that I want to tell from my childhood that we had a neighbor named Hal, and he went and bought a very expensive hi-fi system. And then he invited people to come to his house to demonstrate his system. And he put on a record, but it wasn't music, it was a test signal. And we said, it's great to have this wonderful system, Hal, but, that's not what it's for. What do computers add? They're sort of like a silent, brilliant servant who will do exactly what you want without questioning you, without commenting, but just, yes, sir, repeat it over and over again. And that's the way we use it in every aspect of life. So of course, we're going to use it that way in art as well. The main criterion is always going to be the human element. That do we allow the computer to take over our humanity, or do we just use the computer as a tool? And it's a brilliant tool. It's not just a simple effect. It really changes the way we work, but we have to control it. We can't let it take over. I just want to show a piece of video. We did it like a jazz piece that, put it on, set the parameters, and wail away.
I know that it can be very easy under the intensive pressures of a campaign for even well-intentioned people to fall into shady tactics. To rationalize this on the grounds that what is at stake is of such importance to the nation that the end justifies the means. And both of our great parties have been guilty of such tactics in the past. In recent years, however, the campaign excesses that have occurred on all sides have provided a sobering demonstration of how far this false doctrine can take us. The lesson is clear. America, in its political campaigns, must not again fall into the trap of letting the end, however great that end is, justify the means.
I was in Russia in 1973, Soviet Union, and I somehow had an invitation to come to a school and show video. Don't remember how, but I brought this video. They didn't speak English. They didn't even know exactly what it was about, but they knew who that voice was, and they knew who I was. I was an American showing them video. And that video showed that I was a free person, that I could make fun of the leader of our country and even show it in an audience like that.
In those days, these computers, were huge and unwieldy, often surrounded by a certain amount of security and hard to access. The inventor of digital synthesis is a hero of mine named Max Matthews. Max was a researcher at the Bell Telephone Laboratories who posited the possibility of making sound with a digital computer. But because he was working for the telephone company, they couldn't justify his using their computer for something as frivolous as making music. So Max actually had to rent time on a computer that was located at the IBM Corporation showroom in Manhattan in order to demonstrate that you could use a digital computer to make musical sound. Interestingly, after he demonstrated this, the telephone company exhibited no interest in patenting the device. And as a result, the rest of us were free to use digital synthesis, specifically his oscillator, in making our sounds. The computer became, for me, sort of my musical instrument, a very clumsy one and a very frustrating one. I describe it sometimes as the computer was a little like learning how to play the piano by striking a key and then waiting a week or two to hear what it sounds like. And so, as you can imagine, the process of learning how it was slow and tiresome. I did eventually have a couple of laboratories under my aegis and was able to teach students how to do what I had done and to teach them how to do it with much less laboriousness, I hope. What I tried to do with that piece was the phenomenon was a succession of readings from an index of the way that the Earth's magnetic field has changed with time by radiation from the sun. And this piece was based on that magnetic data from 1961. The notes that you heard were represented readings in the index, and the sound quality, the sound design was my own to try to capture this feeling of radiance that you get from sunshine.
A house of weeds underwater, using candles, inhabited by lovers. A house of broken dishes in a green, mossy terrain, using natural light, inhabited by indigenous people wearing all colors. A house of sound in a deserted factory, using natural light, inhabited by little boys.
I'd like to begin by describing my poem, The House of Dust, generated by a computer running Fortran. The computer program was originally coded by James Penny. The poem proposes parameters for living conditions by randomly choosing values stored in sets relating to each other and combining them with constants. This drew attention to the impact of computing on design and architecture in a provocative yet simple way. In 1968, the computer-generated poem was realized as a physical structure. I decided to teach classes at the House of Dust and invited artists to interact with its open structure by creating new works for it. The physical House of Dust was originally installed in New York City on 24th Street. Over time, I became aware of a dichotomy between the computer-generated poem and the structures realized in response to it. In 2021, working with Joshua Selman, we resolved this dichotomy when in Wiesbaden, we realized a 3D printed house of mud, originally proposed by the poem. A house of mud in a metropolis, using all available light, inhabited by various collectors of all types. The house and the poem were finally printed simultaneously.
The relationship between the computer-generated poem and this computer-generated house is now a fact. Awkwardly stated, a transvironment is a transformationally experienced environment. It is a construct and may also be a construction or artifact that creates an opportunity for a fundamental alteration in perception and interpretation of the surrounding world, the context and the circumtext. It alters the phenomenon of scale, including the relationship of self to object.
Alison, you just invoked scale and the question of scale. And I think that really links to everyone's projects here, which is taking, in some cases, interplanetary phenomena and bringing them to human scaled experience. I don't know, Charles, if you wanted to speak about your solar.
I was lucky to have scientists at NASA who encouraged me to realize that piece of music. They were the ones that pointed out to me the existence of this index of the solar wind on the magnetic field and provided access to that data for me.
And that's what the arts turn out to be. It's you somehow can jam the computer. The computer was not built to make this art, but if you jam it enough, you can make it to function the way you want it to. And it makes me think a lot when I look at these, self-drive cars, talk to the car and say, okay, take me to grandma. But if you're wanted by the police, then the police order is going to override your command to take you to grandma's, and it's going to bring you to the police station. So these are examples of how an individual trying to live in this forest or the horrible world that's created by these computers sometimes has to basically kick it, or knock it over, pour a glass of juice into it.
I often had this sort of little conversation with myself when I was working in these big computer centers, which was, I'm making these guys look good by making music here because what they're doing is nerve gas and nuclear bombs.